My parents demanded I take the fall and go to prison for my sister. You are a failure. You are worthless. She has a real future. Make yourself useful for once. That moment made me realize I no longer had a mother. Imagine being dragged out of a dead sleep at 2 in the morning. The harsh, jarring ringtone of your cell phone shatters the quiet of your tiny studio apartment. You answer it, your heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against your ribs, fully expecting a tragedy. A gruff voice on the other end identifies himself as a police officer, telling you to come down to the downtown precinct immediately regarding an urgent situation with your family. Imagine throwing on yesterday's worn-out jeans and a faded gray hoodie, stumbling out into the freezing night. You drive through the deserted, rain-slicked streets of the city with your hands gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles turn white. Your mind is racing, spinning out worst-case scenarios. A fatal car crash. A home invasion. You are preparing yourself to be the strong one, the pillar of support. You are practicing what to say to comfort your grieving parents, preparing to hold your younger sister while she cries. Instead, you walk into a freezing, sterile precinct. The air is thick with the suffocating smell of stale coffee, cheap industrial floor cleaner, and pure dread. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead sounds like a swarm of angry wasps. And there, sitting in the corner of a drab, windowless interrogation room, you find your family. They are not grieving. They are not broken. They are forming a tight, protective human shield around your 24-year-old sister, Harper. And as you walk through that heavy metal door, panting and out of breath from running across the parking lot, they do not look at you with relief that you arrived safely. They look at you with cold, calculating expectation. They do not want your comfort. They want your entire life. Harper sat crumpled on an uncomfortable metal chair, her expensive designer jacket pulled tight around her trembling shoulders. Her premium mascara was carefully smeared down her high cheekbones, creating a flawless, almost cinematic picture of a tragic, fragile victim. Even inside a police station, facing serious criminal charges, she managed to look like she was posing for a dramatic photo shoot. My mother, Rowena, was hovering closely over her, gently stroking her hair, cooing and whispering soothing words of affirmation. Those were words I had never, not once in my 28 years of existence, heard directed at me. My father, Declan, stood tall and rigid by the table, his jaw set in that familiar, uncompromising way. It was the exact expression he used when he was managing employees at his retail home goods store, treating this catastrophic legal nightmare like a minor inventory error he simply needed to smooth over before the district manager arrived. I rushed forward, my voice trembling, the adrenaline making my knees feel like water. What happened? Is everyone okay? Was someone hurt? I asked, my eyes darting frantically between the three of them. My father held up a hand, silencing me instantly. The gesture was so casual, yet so deeply commanding, that I froze in my tracks. His eyes were hard, scanning the hallway behind me to ensure no officers were listening before he firmly pushed the heavy door closed until it clicked. He did not ask if I had driven safely in the rain. He did not ask if the sudden phone call had scared me. He simply stepped toward the scratched metal table in the center of the room, pulled a single sheet of paper from a manila folder, and slid it across the surface toward me. It was a formal police confession statement. The fields were already filled out in blue ink. My tired eyes darted across the page, struggling to make sense of the dense legal jargon. My brain stumbled over horrific phrases like driving under the influence, hit and run, leaving the scene of an accident and causing severe bodily harm to a pedestrian. And at the very top of the page, printed clearly in my father's neat, precise handwriting, was my name. Sloan. I stared at it. The words seemed to float off the page and blur together. The buzzing of the lights grew deafening in my ears. What is this? I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh, strained whisper. Why is my name on this paper? Harper made a terrible mistake tonight, my father said. His tone was eerily casual, as if he were discussing a minor dent in a fender rather than a violent felony. She had a few drinks at a networking event. She drove home. She hit a pedestrian at an intersection downtown. The woman is currently in the hospital in critical condition. The police have the car, and they have Harper in custody, but they do not have a clear visual of the driver from the traffic cameras yet. We told the arresting officer that you were driving her car tonight because she felt unwell and called you for a ride. The small room started spinning. I felt the blood drain from my face, pooling somewhere in my shoes. You told them I was driving? I choked out, stepping back from the table as if the piece of paper were radioactive. I was at work. I was stocking heavy inventory shelves at the warehouse until midnight. My manager saw me. Dozens of customers saw me. My mother finally looked up from Harper. Her eyes were totally dry. There was no warmth in them, no maternal instinct toward me whatsoever. There was only a fierce, terrifying determination to protect her golden child at all costs. Harper just got her real estate license, Sloan, she said, her voice dripping with thick condescension. She is about to join a luxury brokerage firm next month. A felony conviction would ruin everything she has worked for. She would not survive in a prison cell. Look at her. She is delicate. She is sensitive. I looked at Harper. She peeked out from behind her perfectly manicured hands, her eyes locking onto mine. There was genuine fear in her gaze, yes, but resting just beneath that fear was a sick, twisted sort of entitlement. She expected me to do this. She had spent her entire life watching our parents shield her from every conceivable consequence, and to her, this was just another messy spill for the designated family scapegoat to clean up. I took another step back, my hands shaking violently. You want me to confess to a felony? I could go to prison for years. My life would be ruined. Who would hire me with a violent hit and run on my record? That is when my mother stood up. She closed the distance between us, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She pointed a finger directly at my chest, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. Let us be realistic for a moment, Sloan, she hissed, her breath smelling of peppermint and panic. You are 28 years old. You work as a cashier and stocker at a wholesale furniture store. You live in a tiny, pathetic apartment that we had to co-sign for. You are a failure. You are worthless compared to her. She has a real future. Make yourself useful for once and do your duty for this family. The cruel words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me gasping. I had always known they favored her. I had always known I was the invisible child, the burden they merely tolerated out of legal obligation. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing my own mother mathematically calculate the value of my existence and find it equal to nothing, broke something deep inside my soul. The pain was so sharp it took my breath away. But then, right behind the crushing wave of pain, came a slow, creeping, glorious fire. They looked at me and saw a human shield. They saw a garbage can for Harper's sins. I looked down at the cheap plastic pen resting on the table beside the confession statement. My father tapped the table with his knuckles, growing visibly impatient. Sign it, Sloan. The detective will be back in 5 minutes. We will hire a good defense lawyer for you. We will say you panicked because it was dark and raining. It is a first offense. You will probably just get probation and a fine. We will pay the fine. Just sign the paper so we can all go home. I reached out and picked up the pen. My mother sighed in profound relief. Harper let out a shaky breath, her shoulders dropping as she relaxed. They thought they had won. They truly believed that years of beating down my self-esteem, years of emotional neglect, had trained me perfectly to be the ultimate sacrificial lamb. I looked down at the pen in my hand, feeling its weight. They thought I would blindly sign my freedom away for people who despised me. They were dead wrong. Standing there in that suffocating interrogation room, gripping that cheap plastic pen in my hand, my mind refused to focus on the present moment. The sheer audacity of their demand acted as a violent trigger, pulling me backward through time. It dragged me down the long, miserable hallways of a museum built entirely of my own pain, brightly illuminating every single exhibit of their lifelong cruelty. If you are sitting there wondering how on earth a family gets to the point where they can casually ask one daughter to rot in a prison cell so the other can sell luxury real estate, you have to understand that this was not a sudden, isolated incident. This horrifying demand was the grand finale of a lifetime of systemic betrayal. Exhibit A was the Rust Bucket Honda. When I was 18 years old, I wanted nothing more than a shred of real independence. I desperately wanted to escape the suffocating, tense atmosphere of our house. So, I went out and got a grueling job at a filthy local diner on the edge of town. I spent my shifts scrubbing thick layers of burnt grease off hot grills until my knuckles literally bled and my skin permanently smelled like old cooking oil and stale French fries. I worked every single weekend. I volunteered for every major holiday shift when the tips were slightly better. I aggressively saved every single dollar I earned, denying myself new clothes, movie tickets, and outings with my peers. It took me 2 full, exhausting years to save $2,000. I finally found a used, beat-up Honda Civic that ran decently enough to get me to a community college across town. It was my golden ticket out of their house. The day before I was scheduled to hand over the cash and buy it, I proudly marched to the bank ATM to withdraw my hard-earned funds. The screen flashed a bright, mocking red. Insufficient funds. Pure, unfiltered panic choked me. I ran inside the bank, practically begging the teller to explain what had happened to my money. The woman looked at me with deep pity and gently explained that because my account was opened when I was 16, my father was technically still listed as a joint account holder. He had walked into a branch and transferred the entire balance into his own personal checking account that very morning. I ran all the way home, my chest heaving, my heart breaking into a million pieces, and burst through the front door. There I found Harper, posing in the center of the living room with a brand new designer handbag and a custom-tailored silk prom dress. "Dad, that was my car money," I sobbed, standing in the doorway in my greasy, foul-smelling diner uniform, hot tears streaming through the grime on my face. My father barely bothered to look up from the financial section of his newspaper. "Harper is running for prom queen this year, Sloan," he said, his voice flat and profoundly annoyed. "She needs to look the part. You can keep taking the city bus to the diner. It builds character and work ethic. You are being incredibly selfish, making her big night all about you. Stop whining and go take a shower." I never got a single dime of that money back. I took the unreliable city bus for 3 more miserable years. Exhibit B was my systematically ruined credit score. I was 22, finally enrolled in a local community college, taking exhausting night classes in business administration while working full-time to support myself. I went to the financial aid office to apply for a small student loan to cover the astronomical cost of my textbooks for the fall semester. The financial aid officer looked at her computer screen, frowned deeply, and coldly informed me that my application was denied due to severe credit delinquency. I was shocked. I had no credit cards. Or so I naively thought. It turned out that Harper had intercepted a pre-approved credit card offer that came in the mail under my name. She activated it over the phone using my social security number, which she easily found by snooping in my father's unlocked filing cabinet. She proceeded to max out a $3,000 limit in less than a month on expensive clothes, luxury spa days, and VIP concert tickets. The massive debt went straight to collections, obliterating my credit score before my adult life had even truly begun. When I aggressively confronted them in the kitchen, screaming and waving the bright red collection notices in their faces, my mother stepped forward and slapped me hard across the cheek. "How dare you yell like a lunatic in this house?" she hissed, her face flushed with sudden anger. Harper did not understand how credit limits work. She is just a young girl. We will pay it off eventually. Stop being so overly dramatic and upsetting your sister. They never paid it off. Not a single cent. I was forced to drop out of community college for an entire year and work brutal double shifts at the wholesale furniture warehouse just to clear the fraudulent debt and slowly repair my stolen identity. Harper received a minor scolding, a slap on the wrist, and a brand new leased car for her college graduation present. Exhibit C was the laptop incident. It was a petty, viciously calculated little event that clearly demonstrated exactly the kind of person my sister was beneath her pretty exterior. I had painstakingly saved up for months to buy a refurbished laptop to finally finish my online classes. It was the middle of finals week. I had a massive, 20-page essay due the very next morning that counted for half my overall grade. Harper swaggered into my bedroom, holding a large ceramic mug of scalding hot coffee. She demanded that I stop studying and immediately iron her silk blouse for a date she was going on. I told her I was far too busy and she had to learn to do it herself. She stopped. She looked at me and smiled. A sweet, terrifying, dead-eyed little smile. Then she deliberately tripped over nothing but thin air. The hot coffee poured directly onto my keyboard in agonizing slow motion. The screen sparked brightly, sizzled loudly, and instantly went pitch black. Months of grueling work, my crucial final essay, wiped out in a single second. I screamed in frustration and pure despair. Harper just shrugged her shoulders carelessly, set the empty, dripping mug onto my ruined desk, and said, "Oops. Guess you should have just ironed my shirt like I asked." When my parents heard the commotion, they punished me for making a scene and stressing Harper out right before her important date. These were not just distant memories. They were deep, jagged scars cut into my psyche. They were the very foundation of the angry, exhausted person standing in the interrogation room right now. Every single time they stole from me, every time they fiercely protected her toxicity, they chipped away at my capacity to love them. I had spent my entire life performing mental backflips, trying to earn a single, pathetic scrap of their affection, genuinely believing that if I just worked harder, if I was just quieter, if I just demanded less, they would finally see my worth. But looking at my father impatiently tapping his expensive watch, looking at my mother glaring at me like I was a piece of rotting garbage on her shoe, the truth finally settled into my bones. I was not a human being to them. I was a disposable resource. And they had drained me entirely dry. I gripped the pen tighter, my knuckles popping. The ink flowing from my memories was much darker and far more permanent than anything I could ever write on that police paper. If you have ever been the invisible child in your family, the one who always gave while everyone else took, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to see exactly how this ends. The heavy metal door of the interrogation room clicked open with a sharp, echoing snap. Detective Nash stepped inside. He was a tall, imposing, weary-looking man in his late 50s, with a wrinkled gray tie, messy hair, and deeply lined eyes that had clearly seen far too many wealthy, entitled families attempting to buy or lie their way out of severe consequences. He carried a fresh manila folder under his arm and a worn leather notepad in his hand. "All right," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded instant attention. He bypassed my parents entirely and looked directly at me. "You are Sloan, correct? Your father informs me that you were behind the wheel of the vehicle that struck Mrs. Veda Hayes at the intersection of 4th and Elm tonight. Is that your official, sworn statement?" The small room went terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the relentless, maddening hum of the fluorescent ceiling lights. My father gave me a sharp, commanding nod, his eyes silently threatening me to comply. My mother gripped Harper's shoulder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Harper stared at me with wide, expectant, tear-filled eyes, waiting for me to fall on my sword just like I always did. I looked down at the fabricated confession paper lying on the table. I looked at the cheap pen in my hand. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, I placed the pen down on the cold metal surface. I pushed the piece of paper away from me. "No, detective," I said. My voice was startlingly clear. It did not shake. It did not waver. I was stocking heavy inventory shelves at aisle 4 of the wholesale furniture warehouse until exactly midnight tonight. My shift manager signed my time card as I clocked out. There are high-definition security cameras pointing directly at my register, the employee break room, and the loading dock. I have never once driven my sister's car in my life. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. It felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. "Sloan," my father barked, his face immediately turning a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. "What the hell are you doing? Tell him the truth. Tell him you panicked in the dark and made a mistake." Detective Nash held up a large, calloused hand, his eyes narrowing dangerously at my father. "Let her speak, sir. Do not interrupt her again." "I am speaking the truth," I continued, keeping my eyes firmly locked on the detective, refusing to look at the monsters standing beside me. I was sound asleep in my bed when my parents called me in a panic to come down here. If you subpoena my cell phone's GPS location data, it will scientifically prove I was nowhere near that intersection. My mother let out a dramatic, high-pitched gasp. She staggered backward a few steps, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot, putting on a truly spectacular performance of a sudden fainting spell. She slumped dramatically against the concrete wall, weeping loudly. "How could you lie like this? To the police. To your own flesh and blood." Harper immediately started sobbing hysterically, burying her face deeply in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "Dad, do something. She is lying. She is ruining my life on purpose." My father lunged forward across the small space, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising, vicious grip. Detective Nash reacted instantly, stepping right between us and shoving a firm hand squarely against my father's chest, pushing him back forcefully. "Step back, sir. Right now. Or you will be in handcuffs before you can blink." My father backed off, holding his hands up defensively, but his eyes were pure, concentrated poison. He leaned around the detective's broad shoulder, lowering his voice to a vicious, venomous hiss meant only for my ears. "You listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful, worthless little brat. If you walk out that door and leave your sister to face this alone, you are done. The lease on your apartment is strictly in my name. I will march down to the leasing office and cancel it the second they open tomorrow morning. I will throw all your cheap garbage into the street myself. You will have nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." It was his ultimate trump card. The ultimate threat he always held over my head to keep me terrified and strictly in line. He knew perfectly well that I barely made enough money to buy groceries and survive, let alone put down a massive security deposit on a brand new place on 24 hours' notice. He fully expected me to instantly crumble, to start crying, to beg for his forgiveness, and to quickly sign the paper. Instead, a strange, beautiful, overwhelming sense of calm washed over my entire body. The raging fire that had started in my chest had burned away all the residual fear, all the anxiety, and all the desperate, pathetic longing for their love. "I am already nothing to you," I said, my voice shockingly steady. I looked him dead in his furious eyes, watching the genuine shock finally register on his face. "Cancel the damn lease. Throw my things away. I do not care anymore. I am done being your human shield." I turned my back on them and faced Detective Nash. "I am willing to give a full, sworn, recorded statement about my exact whereabouts tonight and provide my manager's direct contact information. I will also fully consent to a drug and blood alcohol test right this second to prove I am sober. Can we please do this in another room?" Detective Nash looked from my stoic face to my enraged father, and then to the fake-crying Harper. He was a veteran cop. He had seen this exact toxic family dynamic play out 100 times before. "I appreciate your honesty and cooperation, Sloan. Let us go down the hall to my desk." As I walked toward the door, my mother suddenly stopped crying. Her tears vanished instantly. Her voice dropped the dramatic, wailing act and became cold, sharp, cutting ice. "If you walk out of this room, you are dead to us. Do not ever call me again as long as you live." I paused with my hand resting on the cold brass doorknob. I did not turn around to look at her. "Good," I said softly. Then I opened the door and walked out, letting it click firmly shut behind me. The formal process took 2 exhausting hours. I sat in a quiet room down the hall, gave my detailed statement, took the breathalyzer test, and provided every shred of alibi information I possessed. Detective Nash was highly professional and surprisingly kind, offering me a bottle of water and a quiet place to sit while they verified my story. When I finally walked out of the precinct lobby, the sun was just beginning to rise over the city skyline, painting the morning sky in vibrant shades of bruised purple and dull orange. The freezing morning air hit my face, shocking me awake. I shoved my hands deep into my thin jacket pockets. I mentally calculated my assets. I had $34 in my wallet. I had a dead-end minimum wage job. I was about to be officially evicted from my apartment by my own furious father. I was technically, for all intents and purposes, homeless. But as I walked across the empty asphalt toward my old, beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot, I took a massive, deep breath. For the first time in 28 long years, the air tasted clean. I was homeless, but for the first time in my entire miserable life, I was finally, truly free. The brutal reality of newfound freedom is that it is incredibly expensive, and it usually starts with you trying to sleep in the backseat of a freezing car. I drove straight from the police precinct to my apartment. I knew my father. He was a man of his word when it came to inflicting cruelty and punishment. The leasing office opened precisely at 9 in the morning, and I knew he would be standing there at exactly 9:01 to terminate the lease, demand the keys, and change the locks. I checked my watch. I had exactly 3 hours to erase my entire existence from that living space. I grabbed cheap black trash bags from under the sink and started throwing my belongings into them. I did not pack neatly. There was no time to fold or organize. I took my clothes, my cheap work shoes, my toiletries, and my refurbished laptop. I left the heavy furniture. I left the dishes in the cupboards. I left everything they had ever bought me, which, frankly, was not much to begin with. I wanted absolutely no physical ties to them weighing me down. While I was frantically packing my life away, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a long text message from an unknown number, but the hateful, entitled tone was unmistakable. It was Harper. She must have borrowed someone's phone or been given a brief call at the station. You ruined my life. I hate you. I hope you die in the gutter. It was an accident. I was just texting Liam and I didn't see the old lady crossing the street. You're a monster for leaving me here in this cell. I stopped packing and stared at the glowing screen. Liam. That was her direct boss at the luxury real estate agency. A man who was very much married with 2 toddlers at home. So that was the real truth. She was not just driving drunk after a networking event. She was driving drunk while actively texting her married boss, and she mowed down an innocent elderly woman because she could not be bothered to keep her eyes on the road. And I was supposed to sacrifice my entire future, my clean record, and my freedom to cover up her reckless, selfish behavior. I took a quick screenshot of the text message, emailed it to a secure account just in case I ever needed evidence, and then permanently blocked the number. Before I left the apartment for the final time, I logged into my online bank account on my laptop. I had exactly $3,400 to my name. It was supposed to be my carefully guarded emergency fund to pay off an outstanding medical bill. I immediately transferred every single penny into a brand new online bank account that my father had zero knowledge of and zero access to. By 8 in the morning, my small car was packed to the roof with trash bags. I drove out of the apartment complex just as my father's pristine silver Mercedes pulled into the visitor parking lot. He did not see me slipping away. I watched him in my rearview mirror, marching furiously toward my building with a face like thunder, ready to ruin my day and throw me out on the street. I smiled grimly. You are too late, old man. For the next 2 painful weeks, I lived inside my Honda Civic. It was utterly miserable. My back ached constantly from trying to sleep contorted across the uneven back seat. The nights were freezing, and the mornings were damp with condensation on the windows. I showered at a cheap local gym using a free 7-day trial membership. I survived on cheap peanut butter sandwiches, bruised apples, and instant noodles cooked with hot water from gas stations. Every single night, I parked in the back corner of a 24-hour retail store lot, locking all the doors and jumping at every passing shadow outside my window. It was humiliating, cold, and profoundly lonely. But not once did I consider calling them. Not once did I shed a tear of regret for walking out of that interrogation room. I knew I could not stay in that city. My father had connections. He would make sure I never got promoted at the warehouse, and he would likely try to actively ruin any other job I applied for just to force me to come crawling back. I needed vast distance. I needed a completely new playing field where the name Sloan meant nothing to anyone. On day 15 of living out of my car, I filled the gas tank to the brim, bought a large black coffee, and drove south. I drove for 10 grueling hours straight, leaving the bitter memories behind with every passing mile marker. I eventually ended up in a mid-sized, gritty industrial city in North Carolina, over 500 miles away from my toxic family. It was not a glamorous city. It was loud, chaotic, and smelled heavily of diesel fuel and pine trees. But the rent was cheap, the job market was decent, and it was far away. I found a tiny, rundown motel on the outskirts of town that rented rooms by the week. It had dark water stains on the ceiling, peeling wallpaper, and a box TV that only picked up 3 static channels, but it had a deadbolt on the door and a mattress that lay flat. I paid for 2 weeks up front in cash, set up my laptop on the wobbly desk, and started hunting for jobs like my life depended on it. Because it did. I applied to everything available. Restaurants, retail stores, late-night cleaning services. But I also targeted logistics companies and warehouse back offices. I had spent years working the tough warehouse floor. I knew exactly how inventory moved, how shipping manifests worked, and how to spot discrepancies. I just needed someone to give me a chance to sit at a desk instead of lifting boxes. After 30 painful rejections, I finally got a call from a mid-sized freight forwarding company. They desperately needed a data entry clerk. The pay was a mere $1 above minimum wage. The hours were brutal. Second shift, working from 3 in the afternoon until midnight, dealing with angry truck drivers and confusing customs forms. The interviewer, a tired-looking woman with thick glasses and a permanent frown, asked if I could handle the severe stress of high-volume data entry without quitting after a week. I looked her dead in the eye. I have been lifting 50-pound boxes of furniture for years while dealing with screaming customers. I can sit in a chair and type numbers into a spreadsheet. Just give me a chance to prove it. I started the very next day. It was mind-numbing, exhausting work. Staring at complicated customs forms, endless shipping manifests, and messy inventory logs for 9 straight hours a day. My eyes burned constantly, and my fingers cramped from the repetitive typing. The office was a windowless concrete box tucked in the back of a loud, dusty loading dock. Most people quit after a month because of the noise and the stress. But to me, that windowless box was heaven. Because every Friday, a modest paycheck was deposited securely into my private bank account. No one asked me for money. No one told me I was useless or ugly. No one broke my things on purpose. I was a ghost in this new city, and for the first time in my life, I was slowly, quietly building a foundation that belonged entirely to me. I was surviving. But the storm back home was just getting started. While I was quietly and diligently typing shipping manifests in North Carolina, trying to piece my shattered life back together, my family was loud, messy, and falling apart in spectacular fashion back home. The criminal trial for Harper officially began 4 months after the tragic accident. Because I was safely out of state and my alibi was rock solid with video evidence and time cards, the prosecution did not force me to return to testify in person. But I closely followed the news coverage online every single night. The victim, Mrs. Veda Hayes, was a 65-year-old retired school teacher. The violent hit and run had shattered her pelvis, broken both her legs, and caused severe internal bleeding. She was facing months of agonizing physical therapy, multiple surgeries, and a towering mountain of medical debt that threatened to bankrupt her family. Instead of showing an ounce of genuine remorse or offering to help the victim, my family went aggressively on the offensive. This is exactly when the flying monkeys were fully unleashed. My Aunt Blair, my mother's younger sister, eagerly became the self-appointed general of the vicious smear campaign against me. Aunt Blair was the kind of woman who peaked in high school, married a wealthy man, divorced him for a massive settlement, and spent her empty days drinking cheap boxed wine and spreading toxic gossip on Facebook. My newly acquired prepaid cell phone started blowing up with hateful text messages from unknown numbers and distant relatives I had not spoken to in nearly a decade. How can you sleep at night? You abandoned your baby sister. You always were deeply jealous of Harper's success. You set her up to take the fall. Your mother is sick with grief and cannot leave her bed. You're a sociopathic monster, Sloane. Aunt Blair posted long, dramatic, wildly fabricated rants on her public Facebook page, tagging all our family members and mutual acquaintances. She spun a wild, ridiculous narrative claiming that I had hated Harper my entire life out of pure jealousy, and when Harper had a minor fender bender in the rain, I maliciously manipulated the police into making it look much worse just to get her locked away. She publicly called me a sociopath. She called me a traitor to the bloodline. I did not reply to a single one of them. I took clear screenshots of the harassment, quietly blocked the numbers, and went right back to my spreadsheets. Their toxic noise could not reach me inside my windowless office. But the real, unmitigated disaster was happening inside the courtroom. My father, deeply driven by his obsessive need to maintain appearances, flatly refused to let Harper take a standard plea deal. A plea deal meant openly admitting guilt on the record. It meant a guaranteed felony on her pristine background check. He quickly hired a high-profile, ruthless defense attorney, dropping a staggering $45,000 right out of the gate from his retirement savings. The defense strategy was utterly disgusting. They tried to blame the elderly victim. The expensive lawyer argued in court that Veda Hayes was wearing dark clothing, crossed the street erratically outside the lines, and failed to look both ways. They actively tried to paint a 65-year-old grandmother, who was simply walking home from a community bingo game, as a reckless hazard to society. Furthermore, the lawyer claimed Harper was suffering from an undiagnosed anxiety disorder, which tragically caused her to panic and flee the scene rather than stopping to help. It was a catastrophic miscalculation of epic proportions. The jury sat in the box and watched the chilling traffic camera footage. They saw Harper's luxury car speed aggressively through a solid red light. They saw the vehicle strike the elderly woman with horrifying force. They watched the car pause for exactly 3 seconds, the brake lights glowing red, before it sped away into the night, leaving the woman bleeding on the wet asphalt. Then, the prosecution brought out their secret weapon, the phone records. They scientifically proved that Harper was actively sending a text message to her married boss at the exact millisecond of impact. The jury was visibly outraged. The judge was openly disgusted by the lack of accountability. The verdict came down hard and incredibly fast. Guilty on all major counts. Driving under the influence, aggravated assault with a motor vehicle, and fleeing the scene of an accident causing severe bodily harm. Harper sobbed hysterically, her perfect facade crumbling as she was handcuffed right there in the middle of the courtroom. My mother shrieked loudly and had to be physically escorted out into the hallway by 2 armed bailiffs. My father stood there, pale, rigid, and completely silent, watching his precious golden child get dragged away to be processed into a state penitentiary. The stern judge sentenced her to 4.5 years in prison, with no possibility of early parole for at least 3 full years. The shocking news hit the local papers the very next morning. The pristine, successful reputation my father cared so deeply about was instantly shredded into a million pieces. A week later, while I was eating a cold sandwich in the break room, I received a lengthy text message. It was from my father's number. I spent $120,000 in total trying to keep her out of that cage. My life savings are gone. We are drowning in legal debt and mounting bills. Your mother is heavily medicated on antidepressants. Harper is locked in a concrete cell with dangerous criminals. You could have easily stopped all of this by signing that paper. You killed this family. I read the message while sitting under the flickering fluorescent lights of the warehouse. I waited to feel a pang of guilt. I waited to feel sad for them. But all I felt was a strange, light fluttering in my chest. It was not guilt. It was vindication. I typed out my response slowly, making sure every single word was deliberate and sharp. I did not kill this family. I just buried the rotting corpse you created. Do not ever contact me again. I hit send. Then I permanently blocked his number. I blocked Aunt Blair. I changed my phone number entirely the very next morning. I severed the final, rotting strings that tied me to their sinking ship. They were functionally bankrupt, publicly humiliated, and finally facing the severe consequences of their own actions. I closed my laptop, put on my company uniform, and went back to work. I had important data to enter. I had a brand new life to build from scratch. The next 3 years were a massive blur of relentless, grinding, unglamorous hard work. I did not experience a magical movie montage where I suddenly became wealthy, confident, and highly successful overnight. Real success is usually born in the dark, in the quiet, agonizingly exhausting hours when everyone else is fast asleep or out having fun. I worked 60 grueling hours a week. I eventually moved out of the depressing motel and signed a lease on a tiny, ground-floor studio apartment. It was basically a concrete shoebox with a window facing a brick wall, but it was clean, and my name was the only one on the lease. During my brief 30-minute lunch breaks, I ate cold turkey sandwiches while furiously reading heavy textbooks on global logistics and supply chain management. I enrolled in an intensive online certification program, paying for it entirely out of pocket, class by agonizing class. My social life was effectively non-existent. I did not date. I did not go to bars on the weekends. My only friends were the overnight security guards at the warehouse and the late-night cashier at the corner grocery store, who always saved me a fresh cup of coffee. I was a highly functioning machine running on caffeine, cheap food, and pure, unadulterated spite. Every single time I felt utterly exhausted, every time I wanted to cry and quit, I vividly remembered my mother's cruel voice echoing in that interrogation room. "You are a failure. You are worthless." It was the absolute best fuel I ever had. A year and a half into my time at the freight forwarding company, there was a massive upper management shakeup. The company was bleeding money heavily due to systemic inefficiencies and lazy leadership, and the corporate office in Chicago sent in a new director of logistics to violently clean house. His name was Stellan. Stellan was a terrifying, no-nonsense man in his late 40s, with sharp silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a notorious reputation for firing people who wasted his valuable time. He did not care about office politics. He did not care whose feelings he hurt. He cared strictly about data, efficiency, and profit margins. The first week he arrived, he demanded a full, comprehensive audit of our disastrous third-quarter shipping delays. The current managers panicked and immediately pushed the tedious grunt work down to the lowest-ranking data entry clerks, which meant me. I stayed at the quiet office until 3 in the morning for 4 days straight. I did not just compile the raw data like they asked, I deeply analyzed it. I found hidden patterns. I mapped out exactly where the logistical bottlenecks were happening on the floor and why they were costing us thousands. I carefully printed the detailed report, placed it in a professional binder, and nervously left it on Stellan's desk before I went home to sleep for 3 hours. The next afternoon, he called me into his large glass office. As soon as I walked in, he tossed the heavy binder back across the desk. It landed with a loud, intimidating thud. "This is garbage, Sloan," he said flatly, not even looking up from his computer. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. My face flushed hot. "What? Why?" I checked the numbers 3 times. "You are telling me what happened, Sloan." "I already know what happened. The company is losing money hand over fist. I need to know exactly how to stop it. You gave me a boring history lesson. I need an actionable strategy. Do it again." I took the binder back. I did not cry. I did not complain or make excuses. I marched back to my tiny desk and started entirely over. I did it again. He rejected it. I did it a 3rd time. He rejected it again, telling me my formatting was sloppy and hard to read. By the 4th time, I was furious. I marched confidently into his office, slapped the heavily revised report onto his desk, and pointed directly at page 7. "We are losing 18% of our gross revenue on expedited shipping penalties because the warehouse team in Sector B is severely understaffed on Tuesdays, causing a massive backlog that forces us to use premium air freight by Thursday to meet client deadlines. If we shift 3 cross-trained workers from Sector A on Mondays and Tuesdays, We completely eliminate the backlog, cut the premium freight costs, and save this company roughly $80,000 a month. The math is right there in black and white. Stellan stopped typing. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, he looked down at the report. He read page 7. He read page 8. Then, slowly, a genuine smirk spread across his stern face. Do not ever ask for permission to be right, Sloan. Prove it with hard numbers. Good work. You are no longer in data entry. You are my new supply chain analyst. Go move your things to a real desk. That was the pivotal turning point of my life. Stellan became my mentor. He was harsh, incredibly demanding, and utterly brilliant. He taught me how to ruthlessly negotiate, how to read complex vendor contracts, and how to command a room filled with older men even when I was the youngest person sitting at the table. He recognized that I had a unique advantage over the college graduates. I had worked the physical warehouse floor for years. I knew the physical reality of the business, but I also deeply understood the complex data behind it. 2 years later, I found the holy grail of audits. I was auditing a massive, multi-million-dollar contract we held with a national retailer. I spent 3 exhausting weeks digging through 5 years of dense billing history. I found a systemic pricing error. It was a tiny, easily overlooked miscalculation in the fuel surcharge formula that had quietly compounded over several years. I brought the evidence directly to Stellan. He reviewed my math in silence, went completely still for a full minute, and then looked at me with wide eyes. Sloan, you just found a $1.2 million loophole in our favor. The company successfully recovered the massive funds. The CEO flew down personally from Chicago just to shake my hand and take me to lunch. I was only 26 years old. I had started as a terrified data entry clerk, making barely above minimum wage. Now, Stellan formally promoted me to regional audit manager. My base salary jumped to $125,000 a year, plus massive performance bonuses. I finally bought a proper, spacious 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. I bought a reliable, brand-new SUV. I bought expensive, perfectly tailored suits that made me feel like I was wearing impenetrable armor. I had completely transformed from a frightened, abused scapegoat into a woman who wielded real corporate power. I had built a fortress of sheer competence around myself. I was thriving in the bright light, while my toxic family was still rotting in the dark. And soon, our worlds were going to violently collide again in a way none of them could have ever predicted. If you are enjoying this story so far and love seeing karma slowly set the stage, please leave a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and the upcoming confrontation is something you absolutely do not want to miss. For long, transformative years had passed since the night of the horrific accident. I was no longer the frightened, exhausted 28-year-old girl sleeping in the freezing back seat of a beat-up Honda Civic. I was now 32 years old, and my life was entirely unrecognizable. I had been promoted twice since the fuel surcharge incident. I was now the regional director of acquisitions and auditing for the entire Eastern Seaboard division of our logistics firm. I had an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a dedicated team of junior analysts reporting directly to me, and a level of financial security I used to think only existed in movies. Stellan, my tough but brilliant mentor, had recently taken over as chief operating officer of our parent company. His aggressive new strategy was to actively buy out failing commercial real estate companies and convert their massive, empty retail properties into highly efficient, modernized distribution hubs. It was a brilliant pivot, and I was the one leading the financial audits on potential buyout targets. I held the ultimate power to approve or permanently kill a multi-million-dollar acquisition. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Stellan called me into his spacious executive suite. He tossed a thick, glossy financial portfolio onto the glass table between us. "Take a very close look at this one, Sloan," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "It is a mid-sized commercial real estate firm based in Ohio. They manage a chain of retail properties and wholesale warehouses. They are currently bleeding cash. They took on far too much debt before the market shifted, and now they are desperately looking for a massive corporate buyout to save them from filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The location of their properties is geographically perfect for our new distribution network, but their asking price is completely delusional. I need you to rip their books apart. Find every single hidden liability. I want to know if they are worth saving, or if we should just let them drown and buy the properties for pennies at the foreclosure auction. I picked up the heavy portfolio. I looked at the glossy logo on the front cover, and my blood instantly ran ice cold. It was a commercial real estate firm based directly in my hometown. The exact same firm that managed the wholesale furniture warehouse where I used to work. I carried the portfolio back to my office, my hands slightly trembling. I closed the door, locked it, and sat down at my desk. I opened the cover and immediately flipped straight to the Executive Leadership Registry at the back of the prospectus. There it was, printed in bold black ink. Vice President of Regional Operations, Declan. My father. I stared at the name until the letters physically blurred together. The universe truly had a sick, twisted sense of humor. My father had apparently managed to claw his way up the corporate ladder from a basic retail store manager to a regional vice president at this failing real estate firm. But as I furiously dug into the detailed financial disclosures over the next 12 hours, the complete, pathetic picture became incredibly clear. My father was completely ruined. The legal fees from Harper's highly publicized criminal trial had entirely wiped out his savings. But the financial bleeding had not stopped there. In a desperate, arrogant attempt to maintain his wealthy country club lifestyle and save his failing company from going under, my father had foolishly liquidated his entire remaining retirement fund. He had personally invested $150,000 of his own money into the firm's equity shares, basically betting his entire financial future on the hope that a larger corporate buyer would swoop in and acquire them at a premium price. If this buyout deal fell through, the company would officially declare bankruptcy. The equity shares would instantly become worthless paper. My father would lose his high-paying executive job, his remaining dignity, and his entire life savings in one single, devastating blow. He was absolutely desperate for this acquisition. And the final, undeniable irony? The single person holding the red pen, the one executive whose signature was required to approve the life-saving capital injection, was the exact same daughter he had coldly tried to throw into a prison cell. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at his inflated, fraudulent numbers on my glowing monitors. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt like a highly precise surgeon holding a very sharp scalpel over a terminal patient. I spent the entire weekend methodically destroying his portfolio, highlighting every single lie, every hidden debt, and every inflated property valuation. I was going to let him dig his own grave. What would you do if the person who destroyed your life suddenly handed you the exact weapon needed to destroy theirs? Just as I was finalizing the brutal audit report that would officially seal my father's financial doom, my personal cell phone rang. It was a Sunday evening. I was sitting on my expensive velvet sofa, drinking a glass of premium red wine. The caller ID flashed an unknown Ohio number. I usually ignored unknown calls, but a strange, gut instinct told me to pick this one up. Hello? I answered, my voice carefully neutral. Sloan? It's me. The voice was rougher, older, and lacked the obnoxious, bubbly polish it used to have, but I recognized it instantly. It was Harper. She had just been released on parole after serving 3 brutal years of her 4.5-year sentence. I knew this because a victim notification system email had quietly popped into my inbox a week prior. I took a slow sip of my wine. What do you want, Harper? I asked coldly. There was a long, awkward pause on the line. I expected screaming. I expected her to instantly blame me for the miserable years she spent locked in a concrete cell. But instead, she tried to use the exact same manipulative, guilt-tripping tactics our mother had taught her. Mom is dying, Sloan, she said, her voice cracking with forced emotion. She has severe tumors. The doctors say she needs immediate, specialized surgery, but Dad's insurance at the new company is terrible. They're drowning in debt because of my legal bills. They're about to lose the house. We need help. I rolled my eyes so hard they almost got stuck in the back of my head. Through my own independent background checks on my father's financial status, I already knew exactly what was wrong with my mother. She did not have cancer. She had gallstones. Painful, yes. Fatal? Absolutely not. She was aggressively exaggerating a routine, outpatient gallbladder removal surgery into a tragic, life-threatening crisis to emotionally extort money. Is that right? I asked flatly. Yes, Harper cried, sensing what she thought was a tiny sliver of empathy. You have to help us. Dad saw your LinkedIn profile. He knows you are some big corporate director now making crazy money. You owe us, Sloan. If you had just signed that paper like a good sister, none of this would have happened. My life is completely ruined. Nobody will hire a convicted felon. You need to wire us $20,000 to cover Mom's medical bills and help me get an apartment. It is the absolute least you can do after abandoning your own flesh and blood. The sheer, blinding audacity of her words hung in the air. After 3 years in prison, she had not learned a single lesson. She felt absolutely zero remorse for nearly killing an innocent grandmother. She still genuinely believed that I was the villain for refusing to take the fall for her horrific crime. I set my wine glass down on the marble coffee table. I did not yell. I did not curse at her. I simply let the chilling silence stretch out until I heard her nervous breathing on the other end. I am not your flesh and blood, Harper, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, icy whisper. Do you not remember? I am just a failure. I am worthless. I am the daughter who was supposed to be thrown away so you could sell luxury houses to rich people. Sloan, please, don't be a psycho about this, she whined, the fake tears vanishing instantly, replaced by her usual entitled brat tone. Mom is sick. Tell Mom to sell her designer handbags to pay for her gallstone removal, I replied. And as for you? Welcome to the real world, Harper. Nobody is going to save you anymore. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone and permanently blocked the number. I sat in the quiet of my beautiful, safe apartment. The ghosts of my past were desperately reaching out from the dark, trying to drag me back down into their miserable swamp. They wanted my money. They wanted my success. They wanted to feed on me again. But they had absolutely no idea that in less than 48 hours, the final, crushing blow was going to be delivered right to my father's arrogant face. Have you ever had a toxic family member demand money from you after treating you like absolute garbage your entire life? Tell me your stories in the comments below. Because what I did to my father next in that boardroom is something I still smile about to this very day. The day of the official acquisition negotiation arrived with heavy, gray rain clouds outside the corporate office windows. Stellan and I had carefully orchestrated the entire meeting. My father and his desperate CEO had flown down from Ohio to our North Carolina headquarters, fully expecting to present their inflated portfolio, shake hands, and walk away with a massive corporate bailout that would save their miserable lives. They had absolutely no idea who was running the audit. My name was never listed on the preliminary email communications. I was simply referred to as the Regional Director of Acquisitions. I stood in my private office, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. I was wearing a pristine, charcoal gray tailored suit that cost $2,000. On my wrist was a sleek, silver Patek Philippe watch, a hard-earned gift I had bought myself after closing my first million-dollar contract. My hair was pulled back into a severe, professional twist. I looked sharp. I looked intimidating. I looked absolutely nothing like the exhausted, greasy, terrified 28-year-old girl he had tried to throw into a cage. I checked the time. It was 10 in the morning. Showtime. I walked down the long, glass-walled corridor toward the main executive boardroom. Stellan was already inside, sitting casually at the head of the massive mahogany table. Sitting directly across from him were the CEO of the failing real estate firm and my father, Declan. My father was wearing a cheap, slightly wrinkled suit, nervously tapping his pen against his leather notepad. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. His hair had aggressively thinned, and deep, dark bags hung heavily under his anxious eyes. Stellan looked up as I approached the heavy glass door. "Ah, gentlemen," Stellan said, his voice carrying smoothly across the room. I would like to introduce you to our lead negotiator and the absolute best regional director of acquisitions in the business. She has personally conducted the deep financial audit on your entire portfolio, and she will be making the final, binding decision on whether we proceed with this buyout today. I gripped the cold metal handle, pushed the heavy door open, and walked into the boardroom. My father looked up, fully prepared to put on his charming, fake corporate smile to greet the executive. When his eyes locked onto my face, the reaction was utterly spectacular. It was as if someone had physically struck him in the chest with a sledgehammer. The fake, charming smile instantly melted off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. All the blood rushed completely out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like a chalk-white ghost. His jaw literally dropped open. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned white, desperately trying to keep himself from sliding out of his expensive leather chair. "Sloan?" he whispered. The word barely squeaked out of his dry throat. It was not a greeting. It was a plea for mercy. I did not smile. I did not blink. I walked to the front of the room, set my thick audit binder down onto the table with a loud, commanding thud, and looked him dead in his terrified eyes. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing with crisp, corporate authority. "Let us get straight to the numbers, shall we?" The CEO of his company looked wildly confused, glancing back and forth between my father's pale, sweating face and my icy expression. "Declan, do you know the director?" he asked nervously. My father could not speak. He was completely paralyzed by the horrifying realization of exactly who held his entire financial future in her hands. I opened the thick binder. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I clinically, methodically, and ruthlessly dismantled his entire portfolio in front of his boss. I pointed out the heavily inflated commercial property valuations. I exposed the hidden, toxic debts they had tried to bury in subsidiary accounts. I highlighted the exact locations where they had completely falsified their projected revenue streams to make the company look profitable. For 45 agonizing minutes, I verbally eviscerated his entire career. My father sat there, sweating profusely, completely unable to defend himself because every single number I presented was flawlessly documented. When I finally closed the binder, the silence in the room was suffocating. The CEO looked physically ill. "Based on my comprehensive audit," I said, looking directly at the CEO and then slowly turning my gaze to my father, "this company is not a viable acquisition target. The leadership has engaged in gross financial mismanagement. The equity shares are functionally worthless. We will not be bailing you out. We will simply wait for you to declare bankruptcy next month, and we will purchase your empty warehouses at the foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar." My father finally found his voice. It was desperate, pleading, and pathetic. "Sloan, please," he begged, entirely dropping all corporate professionalism. "You cannot do this. I put $150,000 of my own money into those shares. I will lose my house. I will lose everything. Please." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the mahogany table, looking down at the man who had told me I was completely worthless. I looked at his desperate, sweating face, and I delivered the final blow. "This financial portfolio is a massive, toxic mess, Declan," I said, my voice dripping with pure, concentrated ice. "Just like your parenting." The meeting was officially over. The fallout from that catastrophic boardroom meeting was swift, absolute, and entirely devastating. Our company formally rejected the acquisition offer. Less than 3 weeks later, my father's real estate firm officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The board of directors immediately fired the CEO and my father for gross financial incompetence. The equity shares he had foolishly dumped his entire life savings into became nothing more than worthless digital numbers. He lost his high-paying executive salary, his prestigious title, his company car, and every single penny of his retirement fund. They were financially ruined. But toxic people rarely go down quietly. They always double down on playing the victim. A month after the bankruptcy, my phone buzzed with an alert from an old high school friend I still followed online. She sent me a direct link to a popular crowdfunding website. It was a GoFundMe campaign created by Harper. The campaign title read, "Help a struggling family recover from a vicious betrayal." I clicked the link and read the description. It was a masterpiece of absolute fiction and manipulative gaslighting. Harper had posted a tragically sad photo of herself looking thin and miserable, alongside a photo of our mother looking tired in a hospital bed from her routine gallbladder surgery. In the long, sobbing description, Harper claimed that our family had fallen on incredibly hard times due to a series of tragic medical emergencies. But the real kicker was the second paragraph. She explicitly claimed that her older sister, me, had maliciously stolen her rightful inheritance, manipulated our father out of his job out of pure, psychotic spite, and abandoned them to starve in the streets. She was begging the internet for $50,000 to help them save their childhood home from imminent foreclosure. The campaign had already raised a few $1,000s, mostly from gullible distant relatives and Aunt Blair's toxic circle of church friends. The comment section was a cesspool of people calling me a monster, a sociopath, and a terrible daughter. I sat at my desk, looking at the screen. For years ago, this kind of public humiliation would have crushed me. I would have cried. I would have felt the desperate urge to hide in a dark room. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a woman who demanded evidence. I was an auditor. And I was completely done letting them control the public narrative. I opened a secure file on my encrypted laptop. I had saved absolutely everything. I created a brand new, public social media account. I did not write a long, emotional, defensive rant. I simply posted cold, hard, indisputable evidence. First, I posted the official, redacted court transcripts from Harper's criminal trial. I highlighted the section where the judge specifically condemned her for actively texting her married boss while drunk driving, directly causing the horrifying accident that shattered an elderly woman's pelvis. Second, I posted the official police report showing her blood alcohol content was twice the legal limit. Third, I posted a clear, high-resolution photograph of the forged police confession statement my father had tried to force me to sign that night, with my name neatly printed at the top in his handwriting. Finally, I posted the hostile text message my father had sent me, explicitly admitting he spent $120,000 trying to buy her out of prison, followed by the text from Harper wishing I would die in a gutter. I titled the public post, "The Truth About the GoFundMe Campaign." I took the link to my post and pasted it directly into the comment section of Harper's fraudulent fundraising page. I also directly tagged Aunt Blair and every single flying monkey relative who had donated or left a nasty comment. The internet explosion was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. Within 2 hours, the GoFundMe page was mass-reported for severe fraud and permanently taken down by the website administrators. All the donated funds were automatically refunded to the angry donors. The flying monkeys, who had blindly believed Harper's sweet, victimized lies for years, were suddenly confronted with indisputable, legal proof that they were aggressively supporting a violent, unrepentant drunk driver and a father who tried to frame his innocent daughter for a felony. Aunt Blair completely deleted her Facebook account in absolute shame. The distant relatives who had spent years calling me a monster suddenly went dead silent. The local community in their Ohio town quickly caught wind of the viral post. My parents became massive social pariahs overnight. The wealthy country club friends they cared so desperately about officially shunned them. They had tried to publicly humiliate me for the very last time, and I had simply handed them a mirror. They were finally stripped of their greatest asset, their fake, pristine public illusion. They had absolutely nothing left. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, beautifully detached from their chaos. The heavy, suffocating chain that had bound me to their approval had finally snapped. What is the most satisfying way you have ever shut down a toxic person's lies with pure evidence? Let me know in the comments below. Because the peace that followed this moment was the greatest reward I could have ever asked for. After the glorious implosion of the GoFundMe campaign, total radio silence fell over my life. The frantic, threatening emails stopped. The blocked voicemails ceased. The toxic noise of my biological family was finally, permanently extinguished from my universe. I did not feel the need to gloat. I did not feel the need to aggressively rub their faces in their massive failures. I simply let them fade into the pathetic obscurity they had so aggressively earned. I poured all my energy back into my career, my friends, and the peaceful, quiet life I had built. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, my executive assistant walked into my office and handed me a small, slightly wrinkled envelope. "This came in the corporate mail for you, Sloan," she said, looking slightly confused. It was addressed to the headquarters, but it has your personal name on it. It looks handwritten. I took the envelope. There was no return address, just a postmark from a small town in Ohio. For a brief, terrifying second, my heart spiked. I thought it was another desperate, manipulative letter from my father or Harper. I carefully sliced the envelope open with a letter opener. Inside was a single piece of thick, cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was neat, elegant, and entirely unfamiliar. I unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Sloan, my name is Cassidy Hayes. I am the daughter of Veda Hayes. I am writing to you today with a very heavy heart, but also with a profound sense of gratitude. My beautiful mother passed away peacefully in her sleep last month. She was 69 years old. The doctors said her heart simply gave out. While the horrific accident 4 years ago certainly took a massive toll on her physical body, I want you to know that she lived her final years surrounded by her grandchildren, reading her favorite books, and finding moments of genuine joy despite the chronic pain. I am reaching out to you now because my mother made me promise to find you after she was gone. She asked me to deliver a very specific message. When the police detectives told us what happened that night at the precinct, when they explained that your wealthy parents had explicitly tried to force you to take the blame for your sister's violent crime, and that you bravely refused, my mother wept. She did not weep out of anger. She wept because your incredible courage deeply moved her. She spent months feeling incredibly bitter about the accident, furious that a wealthy, entitled girl could almost kill her and try to buy her way out of it. She was losing her faith in humanity. But knowing that you, a young woman who was threatened with homelessness and absolute ruin by her own family, chose to stand up, look the police in the eye, and fiercely protect the truth, changed everything for her. You protected a stranger over your own toxic bloodline. My mother wanted you to know that you are a remarkably good person. She wanted you to know that your painful sacrifice was not in vain. You taught her to believe in justice again. You gave our family the undeniable truth, and that truth allowed us to properly heal. I know your family has likely caused you immense pain. I know you had to walk away from everything you knew. But please know that in this house, your name is spoken with deep respect. Thank you, Sloan, for everything. Sincerely, Cassidy Hayes." I sat at my desk, staring at the elegant handwriting. I read the letter twice, then a third time. Slowly, the heavy, invisible armor I had worn every single day for the past 4 years began to crack. My vision blurred. A hot tear slipped down my cheek, splashing onto the cream-colored paper. Then another. And another. I put my face in my hands and I finally broke down. I cried. I sobbed until my chest physically ached. But I was not crying out of sadness. I was not crying out of anger or bitterness or grief for the terrible parents I never truly had. I was crying out of pure, absolute relief. For years, a tiny, dark, poisoned voice in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded exactly like my mother, had whispered that maybe I was the villain. Maybe I was the monster who destroyed the family. Maybe I was truly the failure they always claimed I was. But this piece of paper, written by a grieving daughter, washed all of that toxic poison completely away. I had done the right thing. It was agonizing. It was terrifying. It cost me my entire biological family. But I had stood firmly in the light, and it had actually mattered to someone. I carefully folded the letter and placed it inside my expensive leather wallet. I carried it with me every single day from that moment forward. It was my shield against the past, and my absolute permission to finally, truly move on. 1 full year later. I am now 32 years old. If you had told the terrified, exhausted 28-year-old girl sleeping in the freezing back seat of her Honda Civic that this would be her life, she would have called you completely insane. My current, verified net worth is approximately $2.4 million. I recently purchased a beautiful, modern 4-bedroom home in a quiet, heavily wooded suburb of North Carolina. I have a thriving, lush garden in the backyard that I strictly tend to on Sunday mornings, completely turning off my corporate phone and simply enjoying the absolute silence. I have a tight-knit, incredibly loyal circle of friends who celebrate my major victories and hold me up when I am exhausted. Stellan recently promoted me again. I am now the Vice President of Corporate Acquisitions. I fly first class across the country, negotiating massive, high-stakes deals and commanding boardrooms with absolute, unbreakable confidence. I am deeply respected. I am valued. I am heard. Last month, the corporate office sent me back to my hometown in Ohio to speak at a massive regional logistics conference. It was the very first time I had stepped foot in that city since the morning I drove away in my packed car. I was staying at a luxury downtown hotel. On my last morning before my flight home, I decided to take a walk to grab a coffee at a local cafe I used to frequent when I was a broke community college student. The walking route took me directly past the large, ugly, gray building of the wholesale furniture warehouse where I used to work. The exact place where I had broken my back lifting heavy boxes for minimum wage while my family told me I was a complete failure. I paused on the sidewalk, holding my expensive latte, looking at the loading dock. The heavy metal bay doors rolled open. A worker in a stained, oversized gray uniform pushed a massive, foul-smelling dumpster cart out onto the concrete pavement. The worker was struggling to push the heavy wheels over the uneven asphalt. I squinted against the morning sun. The worker paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with a dirty, gloved hand, and looked up toward the street. It was Harper. She looked 10 years older than 27. Her expensive designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, sweat-stained warehouse uniform. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, greasy knot. The arrogant, entitled sparkle in her eyes had been completely extinguished, replaced by a dull, hollow look of sheer exhaustion. With a felony record for a violent DUI on her background check, the luxury real estate agencies would never, ever touch her. She was entirely unhireable in the corporate world. She was doing the exact same grueling, backbreaking, minimum wage grunt work she used to ruthlessly mock me for doing. Harper looked at me standing on the sidewalk. She took in my expensive camel hair coat, my polished leather boots, and the quiet, undeniable aura of massive success radiating from my posture. For one long, agonizing second, our eyes firmly locked. I saw the deep shame violently wash over her face. Her cheeks flushed a dark, humiliating crimson. She quickly ducked her head, staring intently at the concrete, and desperately pushed the heavy trash cart behind the brick wall to hide from me. I did not smile. I did not walk over to gloat. I did not feel the sudden urge to remind her that I had one. I simply felt absolutely nothing. True apathy is the greatest, most devastating revenge you can ever achieve against a narcissist. I took a sip of my warm coffee, turned my back on the warehouse, and calmly walked away toward the airport. I never looked back. Family is absolutely not determined by blood. Blood simply means you share genetic markers. Family is determined by mutual respect, by loyalty, and by the people who firmly hold your hand when you are drowning in the dark. Family are the people who joyfully applaud when you finally reach the summit of the mountain, not the people who aggressively try to push you off the cliff to save themselves. I built my entire empire from the absolute dirt they threw at me. They tried to ruthlessly bury me in a prison cell, completely forgetting that I was a seed. Yesterday morning, I checked the blocked voicemail folder on my cell phone. There was a desperate, 3-minute audio message from my father. His voice was completely broken, sobbing pathetically into the receiver. He begged me to please wire him $2,000 to cover their overdue rent, claiming they were about to be evicted onto the street and had absolutely nowhere else to go. I hovered my finger over the delete button, listening to the man who once told me I was worthless cry like a helpless child. I deleted the message permanently without even listening to the end of it. I closed my laptop, walked out to my beautiful, quiet garden, and enjoyed the peaceful sunshine. My dad left one final voicemail yesterday, sobbing, asking if I could just pay for their rent for 1 month because they have nowhere to go. I deleted it without listening to the end. Am I wrong for walking away and never looking back? Thank you so much for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next one.